Book 2, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom. Long delayed, but now resumed library tour, book by book, through my entire library. Not only present, but past and future as well. Every book that I can get my hands on, we're going to talk about them one at a time. And today, we are talking about one of everybody's favorite subjects, rats. This is Robert Sullivan's book, Rats. Observations on the history and the habitat of the city's most unwanted inhabitants. And there you have a classic cover, a map of Manhattan in the shape of a rat. And the reason for that, because, apart from the fact that it's a great cover, is that Sullivan stakes out a particular alley, a particular small network of alleys in New York, in order to observe the native rat, in order to observe what rats do in alleys. He doesn't go there to kill them. He goes there to watch them and see if he can pick out personality, see if he can pick out patterns of behavior. And this is a wonderful book, a perfect example of the best kind of natural history, in that not only is it beautifully written and full, absolutely full of information about wild rats, domesticated rats, rats in history, the whole subject, but it will also change your behavior. The best natural history will raise your awareness. It will change the way you think of the subject animal. And if ever there was an animal that needed an image update, it's rats. I don't know how many of you live in big cities. I'm assuming from the 2020 world demographic figures that most of the people watching my videos live either in or right near a fairly major city, over 1 million people. Most of the world's population does. And that just keeps going up. The percentage of the world's population, there's a large percentage of the world's population that lives in cities of 1 million people or more. And then there's a very large percentage of that percentage that lives in cities of 3 million or 4 million people, and then it keeps going up. So that there are lots and lots of people who live near or in 10 million person cities. And it doesn't really matter that whether you've crossed that threshold, that magic threshold of 1 million people or not. If you have a big city, you're going to have rats. Large brown rats have learned to live with humans. They are every bit as adaptable as humans are. So you might have encountered them. Certainly I have encountered rats innumerable times all over the world, especially here in Boston, where I have, no more needed to do anything special than simply wait until after sundown in Boston proper to see rats everywhere. One time, I was working at a retail bookstore in downtown Boston, and something possessed me to want to do some sort of late night event. We closed at 5 at that old bookstore, but we had some sort of late night, I think it might have been a sense or an inventory related thing, and some madness possessed me, and I volunteered to be part of it. So that for one of the only times while I was working at that store, I left the store at 9 or 10 at night, and I walked over to Boston Common, which is kind of Boston's version of Central Park, smaller, much older, and at the entrance to the subway station at Boston Common, right outside the entrance, there were trash cans, metal trash cans. And I was walking towards one of them and noticed that it seemed to be moving, and it was because it was entirely covered in rats who were scavenging inside the trash can, and then the lower status rats were clinging to the sides of the trash can. There were a bunch milling about the ground for dropped crumbs or anything like that. And as I approached them, from a distance, it looked in the gloom, in the dark, like the trash can was moving, like it was throbbing on its own, like it was alive. And then once I crossed the street and got within 10 feet of that trash can, all movement stopped. And in the glint of there was a distant street light, I could suddenly see hundreds of eyes, all looking straight at me, because I'd gotten too close, and all the rats were no longer foraging. Now they were looking to see if they were in danger. I didn't feel in danger myself at all. There are some urban legends about rats that attack humans, but I didn't feel in any danger. But I realized what I'd heard a million times before. I used to know a friend who was on the janitorial staff at the old Boston Garden. I forget what corporate sponsorship name Boston Garden has nowadays, but once upon a time, it was a place that you went for Celtics games, for Bruins games, you went to Boston Garden. And it was right next to North Station, which was a big transport hub, probably still is, for all of the commuter rails heading out of Boston. And I had a friend who worked the janitorial staff at Boston Garden, and he used to say, he would come into my bookstore to get books once in a while, and he would say, if you go to the bleachers or the box seats of Boston Garden late at night, 2 or 3 in the morning, the floor of Boston Garden, where the ice is laid for the Bruins games, where the parquet is laid for the Celtics games, would be covered in rats. They'd be rummaging all around the seating, going all the way up on either side, just a sea of rats. Just foraging everywhere for all the stuff that humans leave behind. That's the reason why rats are so prolific in cities, because humans are huge wasters of food. They always have been. That's why we have domesticated animals. That's why we have had rats and mice wherever we've lived, because we waste a lot of food. And they're right there to scoop it right up. So I was aware, of course, of rats. I'd seen plenty of my share of them. And then in later years, I also had the opportunity to know a woman in Boston who had a pet rat. And she warned me about that. The first time when we were getting to know each other, she said, "Oh, I love all animals. I love them all." I said, "Even snakes?" And she said, "Yes, even snakes." And I said, "Even rats?" And she said, "Oh, yes, especially rats." And then once we started talking about me going over to her place to spend some time, to sit down for a meal or a glass of wine, some music, some talk about books, she said, "Oh, I should warn you, I have a pet rat here, and I don't keep him in a cage. He has the run of the place. He's completely friendly, but if that's going to freak you out, I don't want you to get here and get all upset with me." And I thought, well, you're a big boy, put on a front. So I said, "No, it won't freak me out at all. I won't bring my dogs, obviously, but it won't bother me." So I went, and it did freak me out. It did freak me out. This thing was big and white. She'd got it from a lab, rescued him from a lab. It was big and white with bright pink eyes and a bright pink nose and a bright pink tail that seemed to go on forever. You don't realize how long rat tails are until you see one up close. It's almost the length of the thing's body. And perhaps most disconcerting of all, I knew all of those things anyway, but perhaps most disconcerting of all about her pet rat is that he had lost his inhibitions about humans. He came right up to me. And over the course of a few evenings, I got to know him. And I have to admit, my opinion changed. As a confirmed city dweller, you'd think my opinion would be carved in stone, but I thought he was adorable. Absolutely adorable. And cuddly and affectionate. And also, one other thing that I absolutely could not help but notice, smart. I felt a little guilty. I had beagles, a whole apartment full of beagles at the time, and I love my boys. And beagles are really smart for dogs. But this was just completely different. This was a look at something and without doing any kind of work, just mentally figure it out kind of smart. As opposed to my boys, who not only couldn't do that, but would often have to make the same exact mistake 5 times in a row before they finally got that there was a mistake. This was a different kind of thinking. Needless to say, it was strange to me, just as it's strange when I visit the house of someone who has cats. Because it's weird to have a domestic animal roaming around the space where I am not able to talk to them. If I go to your home and you have a dog roaming around your space, there's going to be about 30 seconds. 30 seconds, 25 seconds. It's about that long an interval where we don't know each other. And after that, we are going to know each other, and I'm going to know perfectly well where that dog is at all times, what they're thinking, what they want and don't want. But with cats and with this rat, I had no idea. No idea at all. How to communicate with the thing, what any of its body gestures or language meant. Nothing at all. But I ended up cuddling his belly. I ended up letting him, she said he's really fond of sort of settling in your hair. He really kind of likes doing that. He'll crawl all over you. He likes nuzzling his nose against your nose. And my first thought was, how on earth can a thing with a brain the size of a dried pea know what my nose is? But he did. He absolutely did. And she was right. Once he was comfortable with me, he crawled up onto my head and sort of nestled in my hair, and he stayed that way during, I think, 2 Beethoven symphonies on the record, where he was perfectly content to just stay up there. It was weird. Somewhere out in the etherverse, There is a photo of me with a rat on my head. But one way or another, I knew rats, but I had no idea of the whole world of them until I read this book. Not even Hans Zissner's book, Rats, Lice, and History, which is great. It's one of my favorite books of natural history and epidemiology. Not even that had prepared me for the full extent of what I learned in this book. If you are afraid of rats, you should absolutely read this. And oh my God, if you're a friend of rats or have one of your own and haven't managed to read this book, you have to. One of your favorite books in your entire life is waiting for you to go to the bookstore and get it. And I want to read you a bit of what you'll be experiencing here. First, the dangers of rats. First, we're going to read a little bit. Sullivan is perfectly clear about that do pose dangers to humans. Rats carry bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and fungi. They carry mites, fleas, lice, and ticks. Rats spread trichinosis, tularemia, leptocirrhosis. They carry microbes up from the underground streams of sewage. Public health specialists sometimes refer to rats as germ elevators. Though targeted over and over by man, rats generally wreak havoc on food supplies, destroying or contaminating crops and stored foods everywhere. Some estimates suggest that as much as 1/3 of the world's food supply is destroyed by rats. And then he gets into a little bit of why they're so successful. So buckle up, this gets a little blue. Rats succeed while under constant siege because they have an astounding rate of reproduction. If they are not eating, then rats are usually having sex. Most likely, if you are in New York while you are reading this sentence, or even in any other major city in America, then you are in proximity to 2 or more rats having sex. Male and female rats may have sex 20 times a day. And a male rat will have sex with as many female rats as possible. According to one report, a dominant male rat may mate with up to 20 female rats in just 6 hours. Male rats exiled from their nest by more aggressive male rats will also live in all-male rat colonies and have sex with other male rats. So in other words, they got to do it. They got to get some. The gestation period for a pregnant female rat is 21 days. 21 days, less than a month. The average litter between 8 to 10 pups. And a female rat can become pregnant immediately after giving birth. If there is a healthy amount of garbage for the rats to eat, then a female rat will produce up to 12 litters of 20 rats each year. Each a year. 12 litters of 20 rats each a year. One rat's nest can turn into a rat colony of 50 rats in 6 months. One pair of rats has the potential of 15,000 descendants in a year. 15,000 descendants in a year. This is a lot of rats. And while the regenerative capabilities of the rat might seem incomparable to those of any other species, in Rats, Lice, and History, the classic work on the effect of disease on human history, Hans Zissner suggests that the fertility rate of the human can rival the fertility rate of the rat. I don't see how that's possible. I really don't. But there's another bit that I want to read here, because it's an example of what this author does throughout this book, which is that in addition to writing about rats, he gets into their minds as much as he can. He gets into their behavior. He consults with all kinds of experts, not just exterminators, but all kinds of experts about rats. Although I imagine by the time he finished writing and researching this book, he himself was an expert. And I seem to recall, this came out in 2004, I seem to recall him getting an endless amount of gigs on, the last 5 minutes of cable shows talking about rats. But I want to read just this last thing here, because I could read huge chunks of this book. It's so enjoyable. But one of the things I find most fascinating about rats is that they have a sense of where they are and where they have been. This is explained by the fact that rats love to be touching things. Biologists refer to rats as phygmophilic, which means touch-loving. And some of you will know, one of you particularly who's listening to this who has a pet raccoon, will know that they are phygmophilic as well. They live to touch things. They live by touching things. Consequently, rats prefer to touch things as they travel. Their runways are often parallel to walls, tracks, curbs, and infested basements, grease slicks parallel ceiling beams and the run of sewer pipes. Rats are thought to feel especially safe at corners, where they are simultaneously touching a wall and also free to escape. As they travel again and again for food, as they escape oncoming trucks or upon the return of a drunk human home to an apartment, flee into relative safety of garbage cans, rats can develop a muscle memory a kinesthetic sense that allows them to remember the turns, the routes, the course of movement. Naturally, you're thinking rats in mazes, right? They might have an aptitude for this. As young rats follow older rats, the trails are repeated, passed on. Exterminators like to say that if the walls of an alley or a rat-infested block were somehow taken down without disturbing the rats would awaken the next evening, venture forth, and travel precisely the same routes as the night before, as if the walls were still there. They would remember the walls. Deep in their rat tendons, rats know history. That is just fantastic. That is just fantastic. And the author also, I'll read you one more thing here. The author also gets to know locations himself. He starts to share that quality with the rats in his area, in one particular alleyway. In my mind's eye, as I looked down Theater Alley, I could see the crowds that had snuck through it, and I even like to think I could see the individuals. There was Herman Melville, who used a library at one end of the alley. There was Edgar Allan Poe, who edited a newspaper a block away. I could see Poe trudge through the garbage, see rats scatter. There was Walt Whitman, who worked at a newspaper just around the corner and loved to go to the plays, might have walked up Broadway to the time to hear Emerson speak, and then, when he typed up his review of Emerson's lecture for his newspaper, might have walked back through Theater Alley, thinking about the soul and the nature as an expression of God, or so I like to think. That's just awesome. And that runs throughout here. He does talk to a lot of executioners. He talks to a lot of people whose job it is to kill rats. And the thing, not to stress this, he doesn't stress this, so I'm not going to stress it either. But one of the things you notice when you're reading the book is how little personal anger there is on the part of executioners. A lot of the executioners here really don't want... They will kill rats by the hundreds for their job every day, but they have no anger, no animosity towards them. I think the more they get to know these animals and learn about them, and you have to learn about them to kill them, the more they feel, these are a lot more like us than they are different. These are city dwellers who are just trying to make it. They're living in the best accommodations that they can, so to speak, afford. They're eating whatever they can afford. They're congregating together out of friendship and also for protection. I think that would square. I knew one exterminator in New York once upon a time who definitely felt the same thing. Definitely felt the same thing. When he was done with a work shift, he felt bad about the rats that he had killed. Not good. Didn't feel a sense of accomplishment at all. And he told me something that's echoed in this book. He said that one time his crew took on a new exterminator who did enjoy it and who was happy with his total when his total was really high at the end of the day. And the exterminator I talked to echoes the exterminators in this book, that they all found that guy weird. They were certain that he was just working up to killing humans. And implicit there is that they didn't think it was that big a jump. and I tend to agree. After having spent time with a rat, I tend to agree, and especially after reading this book. So I'm going to say, for the Library Tour of Doom today, this is an overwhelming recommend, even if it gives you the heebie-jeebies. In fact, especially if it makes your skin crawl. You might want to try this book. Because the best natural history will do this. It will take you inside the world of an animal you thought you knew, and you'll come out with a better understanding. So I want to recommend this to you if you think rats are gross. I have often wondered what would happen if I had a rat in an apartment where I lived. I often wonder. I've had mice in plenty of apartments where I live. Beagles, none of my beagles were ever interested in mice. Didn't care about them at all. Unless they got too uppity. I mean, if they were blatant, then my boys would chase them, but they had no idea what to do. They didn't kill them or anything. They would just chase them if there was a running object moving around the floor. And I have made it clear on this channel many times, I don't mind mice as roommates. They're perfectly neat. They're perfectly nice. They're actually adorably cute. And if you get to know them, as I have occasionally got to know some of them, they put very little stock by the typical barrier between wild animal and domesticated animal. They put very little stock by that. A so-called wild mouse who lives in the cupboard in your kitchen isn't going to need much coaxing to realize that you're okay and that he can sort of sit there and watch you cook your food. And it doesn't need to run. I even had one mouse in one house a long time ago who got so accustomed to me and knew so well that I was no danger to him. Once you don't go on the floor, I'm not going to bother you at all. They would actually let me sort of put my finger near him, and he would just stick his little nose up out of curiosity. He wouldn't run at all. I've often wondered, I don't have any mice now. I don't have any mice now. There's a particular reason for that. There's a particular reason for that. A happenstance has brought into my life a breed of dog that was entirely made to kill mice and rats, and not just to chase them. Frida doesn't just, she chases anything that moves. She doesn't like unauthorized movement, but she chases mice to kill them. She goes ballistic with mice. I've seen her chase other things, squirrels, bunny rabbits. There are wild bunny rabbits that live in the shrubbery across the street. I never noticed them when that shrubbery was a field. I never noticed them there, but now there's an active colony of them that live there. And sometimes they're right there on the lawn in the morning, in the early morning. Sometimes they'll see us and stay where they are. Sometimes they'll scamper away. Frida doesn't give them more than a look. She notices that they're there. Same thing with squirrels or chipmunks. She notices that they're there. But mice, mice are completely different. She vanishes like the Flash in a special effect. She's just gone. So we'll be roughhousing on the floor, and then a mouse will run across the kitchen floor. This was years ago. They're not there anymore. But a mouse would run across the kitchen floor, and I would literally not be able to see Frida move. 1 minute we would be roughhousing, and the next minute she'd be in the kitchen, smashing the thing's body against the walls of the cabinets. So I don't have any mice anymore. And I have a feeling that rats would be the same way. Schnauzers were made to kill rats and mice. A rat is much bigger, and a rat would probably put up more of a fight. But I have a feeling that a rat would last about a few seconds against Frida. She's much stronger than she looks, and her skin is just incredibly tough all over, including her muzzle. And her muzzle also has all of that those matted whiskers. That's why those were developed as guard against rats. But her skin just all over is tougher than any dog that I've ever had. One time up in Vermont, one of the house cats up in Vermont took a swipe at Frida's rump that was so on target and so powerful that it pulled one of the cat's claws off. The claw was embedded in Frida's rump, but it had not pierced her skin. It was lodged in the tough, callousy skin of her rump. And that was as bad as that cat could do. Unless it aimed for the face, that was as bad as that cat could do, and it could not break her skin. I don't know that same thing is true of my Basset Hound Lucy. Her skin might have been normal, but there was so much of it. There was so much of it that we never encountered anything that could actually penetrate her skin. My veterinarian had a hard enough time just drawing blood. But I've often wondered what would happen if I looked up and there was a rat here. I definitely would not scream and squeal, and I'm 100 times less likely to do that after reading this book. This is the ultimate hymn to rats. Understands perfectly well the dangers, the reasons for their extermination in cities, but doesn't hate them any more than those exterminators do. I don't think that will ever happen. I'm pretty sure there are rats in the basements of this building, but rats tend to be, in my opinion, smarter than mice. I don't think a rat would risk it. Frida would kill the thing, and I don't think it would take her much. I don't think it'd be much trouble to do. I might have to check her for bites. Mice can't even penetrate her skin, so I don't have to worry about them biting her, but a rat might be able to. But I don't think the thing would have a chance. She's so fast. When the killing rage is on her, her ordinarily impressive speed triples, and she becomes a blur of motion. So I think that's instinct. I think that's when the neural commands don't have to complete the whole circuit. It's hardwired in. Either way, I might not ever have a rat here unless I keep one in a cage and let him out in periodic intervals. But I think that would be cruel. Not only to keep any kind of an animal in a cage, but also to keep him in a cage in the presence of a predator who isn't just a predator by chance, but wants to kill and eat him. I think that would be tantamount to psychological torture. Once both animals knew, once Frida knew what was in the cage, once the rat knew what was patrolling around outside the cage, I don't think that would work. But I'd be curious to know. If I ever have another friend who has a pet rat, I would definitely go over and make its acquaintance again. And you might be tempted to do that too after you read this book. So I would strongly suggest it. It's a strong recommend. Not every library tour of doom will be, but you have to expect that the predominance of them will be. Oh, this thing has blurbs. Kirkus Review loved it, but that wasn't me. Mark Kurlansky loved it. Pete Hamill loved it. New York Times Book Review loved it. San Francisco Chronicle, Ian Fraser. Okay, well, as I was saying, the Library Tour of Doom won't always be recommends, but you have to expect that it mostly will be. Because I get the impression, unlike a lot of people, the huge percentage, like 98% of the books in my collection are books that I've already read and decided I liked enough to keep them there. I'm not like a lot of booktubers where I have a huge number of books on my shelves that I haven't got to yet. They're almost exclusively the review copies that I have set aside. And if you don't count those, then my library collection is virtually 100% books that I've read and know I love, know I want to keep. So the Library Tour of Doom will probably be lots of recommendations. So you should prepare your TBR accordingly. Definitely put this on it. Well worth your time. So I'm going to wrap this up and get back to the thunderous heat of the day. 100 degrees here in Boston. 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The thunderous heat of the day. The Bean and I went out first thing this morning when there was still a bit of a breeze, blowing through the grass, blowing through the trees. A bit of a breeze, not all that cool a breeze, but refreshing in its own way. But yesterday she made it clear to me, I was thinking, we'll go out early in the morning, we'll go out first thing, and then we'll wait until evening. She can go a long time without going outside. But yesterday she made it clear that, she can do that, she doesn't want to, and that's what comes first. I'm not going to tell her, well, no, you have to hold it in for 6 more hours. So we are going to go out. Probably as soon as I finish this. It's only mid-morning here. We're probably going to go out. And the heat's really bad. The heat and humidity is really bad. It's full day now. It's not morning anymore. So that walk's going to have to be short, and it's going to be pretty bad. It's going to be pretty bad. Yesterday, we went on a late afternoon walk. I realized in the late afternoon that she couldn't possibly, it would be cruel. She could do it, but it would be cruel to make her wait until nightfall to go and to stretch her legs. She needs the exercise and to relieve herself. So we went out in the late afternoon when it was 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And we did a very short walk, a very short loop, something that would ordinarily count as a very short walk for the day. And before we finished that loop, we were on our way back when we got to the deep shade of a really old tree, and Frida stopped. First time she's ever done that in her life. She stopped. Once we hit the shade, she stopped and just stood there, panting and looking around. She wasn't in any kind of distress. She wasn't alarmed, but she didn't want to keep going. She wanted to wait and cool off a bit instead of charging ahead. That's unheard of. She's never done that before. So we stood. We stood and just chatted in the shade for 5 minutes. Might not seem like long. It certainly wasn't long when I was walking an old basset hound, but it's an eternity for this dog. She always wants to go blasting ahead. That's how bad it was, and it's that bad out now. So I'm gonna have to wrap up this. There are no rats that are gonna be outside in this kind of weather. They're all thickly ensconced in the shade, apparently having sex. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up. But the Library Tour of Doom will recommence. Maybe not on the weekend, but every weekday. Anyway, I will see you later. Thank you, BookTube.